Hi, and Happy New Year! Welcome back to Fulltime. I am Tamerra Griffin. Sorry, I forgot that this is our first time seeing each other and hanging out in 2026. I feel like there's been sort of like this long string of time where I think I said this last week, you sort of just forget what day it is. And in terms of this high impact player rule that the NWSL announced 2 weeks ago now, that feels like a story that has clearly spanned 2025 and 2026. So forgive me, I almost forgot to wish you Happy New Year. I hope everyone is doing well, getting 2026 off to a great start. This week on Fulltime, we have a very special guest. NWSL Players Association Executive Director Meghann Burke is joining us to unpack this high impact player rule because yes, it still needs unpacking. This is an ongoing story. And I just think given how thick with layer and meaning this moment is in regards to the rule, how it affects free agency, how it might affect Trinity Rodman's future with the league, it's helpful to just pause at every step of the way, regroup, recontextualize, catch you guys up because I know people have been in and out with the holidays. Hopefully you're back now, for better or worse. I know it's kind of rough, that transition, but we got you. And I'm really, really happy that Meghann made some time to speak with us because there's a lot to sift through here. And I think as this story just continues to unfurl, it's helpful to understand all of the different facets of this narrative and this conversation because it feels very in the moment in a lot of ways, but it also is going to determine the future of this league. So we at Fulltime have been dogged in our coverage of this, making sure that you guys are as informed and updated as possible. This is not by any means the first episode that we've done on the high impact player rule or free agency, but if it's the first you're hearing about, don't worry. There's plenty for you to catch up on at The Athletic, both in written form and past episode podcast form that I encourage you to do. It's all there. We've got videos, we've got interviews, some with me, some involving my co-host Meg Linehan, who is hopefully enjoying her parental leave and not listening to this. But if you are, as always, hi, Meg. Say hello to the family. Make sure that you catch up because we are still at the early stages, I believe, of this story. And there's a lot to sort of hold. But like I said, all the more reason it's important for us to hear from folks like Meghann. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, my conversation with NWSLPA Executive Director, Meghan Burke. All right, as mentioned earlier, I am joined by NWSL Players Association Executive Director Megan Burke, who has graciously agreed to join us on the show despite recovering from a cold. So she's going to be sipping her tea while also maybe kind of spilling it, if you know what I mean. Megan, thank you so much for joining us.
There.
Happy
Thanks for
New
having
Year.
me on, Samara. Happy New Year to you. It's great to be with you.
Apart from your recovering immune system, how are you doing? It's been a very busy, like there's holiday busyness and then there's high impact player rule busyness and chaos. So before we get into that, how are you doing? Because I know you've been all over the place.
Sweet. I appreciate that. Well, the most important thing, my Santa did visit my kids. We had a lovely holiday. Obviously a bummer to be, sick during that time and not able to get as much time with family as I'd hoped. But had a nice holiday and, our team, I just got to give a shout out to our incredible team at the PA. I don't think they, it sort of describe a lot of this work we do is it's like watching a duck on the water. Like it looks really smooth on the surface and you have no idea how much paddling is going on underneath it. And so, we've brought on some new folks that we'll be announcing soon, but really grateful that even though I tried to shut the office down for the holiday, they rose to the occasion because they are relentlessly committed to the work of advocating for the players. And so just got to give a shout out to them.
Wonderful. Yeah. I was, I think, in line at a cafe ordering some hot chocolate when the NWSL announced this high impact player rule, which feels further away than 2 weeks ago and also like yesterday. But let's start there for people who are kind of crawling their way back to real life post holidays. It has been 2 weeks since the NWSL announced the rollout of this high impact player rule. Megan, can you sort of capture or summarize the PA's stance on this and go into a little bit of the details of why the PA is opposed to this rule?
Sure. This is all coming to pass, largely driven by Trinity Rodman's contract expiring at the end of the year. And there's been no announcement yet, but I know the parties are working really hard, not for me to say what's going on there, except that I know everyone's really working hard to keep her here and get to an agreement. We certainly hope that happens. We love Trinity, and we'd love to see her stay in the NWSL and as a member of our union. So, as you're aware, we filed a grievance over the league's rejection of a deal that she'd agreed to it's hard to believe it was a month ago at this point. So that grievance is still pending. I've gotten some questions about this, so I'll just go ahead and answer it on the front end, which is that we did agree to an extension of time for the league to respond to that grievance. Mm-hmm. I'm a lawyer. It's a professional courtesy. I wouldn't read too much into it. It's a procedural thing, but we do anticipate the league's response to be forthcoming. I think I know what it's going to be, but we will wait. So we anticipate that being a disputed or contentious issue into 2026. And in no way, shape, or form is Trinity reaching a new deal going to resolve the pending grievance. That will move forward. Separate and apart from that, once the league rejected that contract, they, of course, were, and I believe them, that they're motivated to keep Trinity in the league. It's good for all of us. And so they came to us with this proposal, I guess in mid-December. We'd had some conversations leading up to that, to be fair. And so they obtained board authority, I should say, to move forward with this in December. I shared it with our board of player representatives. Just like the league does, we have quarterly board meetings and conveniently had an opportunity to meet as a board. And for your listeners, all the players in NWSL are represented by, we like to call it a healthy little democracy. Say what you will about democracy in certain corners of the world. Especially right now.
These days.
Exactly. We have an opportunity, though, in our little corner of the universe to hopefully run a healthy, functioning democracy where each player's voice matters, and the representatives are there to represent the interests and concerns and questions of our members. And so we discussed it at our board meeting. I think that this union is run by a very thoughtful group of people who care deeply about the future of this league. And I think the general consensus is that this is not a wise decision. We're not supportive of the high impact player rule for a number of reasons. We've, I think, articulated some of those, but chief among them is we don't think it achieves the league's intended purpose. It excludes lowercase HIP, I guess, high impact players who have proven themselves on the world stage. We think the criteria are deeply flawed. It takes the discretion out of the hands of teams and general managers whose job is to construct rosters and make decisions about assessing fair market value. It inserts the league into I think a place they don't really belong, especially in a free agency world, by stipulating certain criteria that some players must meet in order to access this additional pool of funds that has no relationship to roster building, by the way. This is all about compensation and commercial interests. We, fundamentally disagree with that premise, which is why it's hard for us to even propose criteria that would work, because we think the framework itself is flawed. We have proposed that, let me say this is, I think, a really important point too. We appreciate that the board and the league see the need to increase investment in player compensation in order to remain competitive on a global labor market. We support that, and we're appreciative of that. We just think that the better use of those dollars is to increase the salary cap by the same amount they've already agreed they're willing to let teams spend.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more meaty sort of points of contention at this point in the story, is the fact that the players union and the league both have the same goal of wanting to retain the highest level of talent. They want this league to be competitive and viable. They both agree on the figure, at least right now, that they think could help achieve that. But the route of getting there are very different. The routes of getting there between those two groups are very different. And
I agree with that.
It's always in that middle ground that, the stories are and the tension. And there's so many branches that I want to pull from your response. But I do think it's really important at this stage to really clarify one section of the CBA that I know has been a major sticking point from the players union perspective. And I think in terms of the broader narrative, when people read, and as even I and others have reported, that when this HIP rule was announced, the league, and I spoke to the league and heard this myself, said that they gave the union consultation time. And I think that given the timing of the announcement, it was easy for people to see that and maybe imagine, for example, that the league was sort of trying to force this thing through and the consultation time maybe only lasted 5 minutes or not enough time for the union to properly assess what was going on. But I have since learned that there's actually sort of a much bigger issue within the CBA that really results in a matter of different interpretations of this rule. So I want to read the section aloud first, Megan, and then I want to get into sort of what this means and how the union interprets this versus how the union believes the league is interpreting it. So the section, and listeners, you're probably going to hear this section number a bunch from here on out. It's important. Section 816, which reads, NWSL may, in its discretion, after consultation with the NWSLPA, increase the team salary cap in any year. NWSL may, in its discretion, after consultation with the NWSLPA, reduce or eliminate the salary cap charge against the team salary cap for certain roster classifications. So I think we need to pause and break this down a little bit, Megan. Can you talk about the certain roster classifications portion of that and how we should sort of understand what that means in terms of maybe even providing some examples?
I appreciate that. And thank you. I love to nerd out about the CBA, as I think you know, so I appreciate you reading it for your listeners here. The starting point, first of all, we do have a grievance and arbitration procedure in our collective bargaining agreement. We have not yet, but will be filing a grievance opposing the high impact player rule, and the league knows that. We will raise legal arguments, and I am an attorney myself, and I respect the legal process. And so I'm going to let the lawyers do the lawyer thing. But for the purposes of this conversation, I think it's important to just use common sense. So let's just talk common sense. The language you just read, you have to ask yourself, what is a roster classification? The high impact player rule is not a roster classification. A roster and roster classifications deal with the availability or unavailability of players for competition. That is the common sense understanding of what is a roster, what are roster classifications. It is all about availability of players or certain numbers of players who are eligible for competition, international versus domestic players, for example. Players who might not be available might be out on maternity leave, so 45-day injured reserve, season-ending injury list. This is not that. The high-impact player rule is not a roster classification. It is a rule about player compensation, which is what the league itself called this. It's a player compensation rule. This is all about wages. This is all about compensation. Now, the language you just read in Section 816 of the CBA, the reason it exists, and so let's just, again, stick with just the common sense analysis here, which the reason you have to have a rule like this about roster classifications is that in the CBA, there are minimum roster requirements in order to field a team for competition. So a team must maintain a roster, capital R, which is a defined term in the CBA. Roster classification is not. But capital R roster must have at least 22, no more than 26 players, of whom 4 can be salary cap exempt, and that is a collectively bargained issue. That is kind of those are the numbers you have to have available to you to field a team for competition. If in the course of any given season, as happens every year, you get a number of players who sustain an injury, they're off on national team duty, they're on maternity leave, mental health leave, personal leave, a team has to have the ability to sign new players in order to field a team for competition. If they are at their salary cap, they cannot. And that is why the league must have the ability to reduce or eliminate the salary cap charge for certain roster classifications, for example, 45-day list, season-ending injury list, maternity leave, in order for a team to then have cap space to sign new players. Anyone who's looked at the high-impact player rule knows that's not what this is. So the high-impact player rule is not a roster classification, and therefore the league does not have the unilateral right, even after consultation, which we don't think did happen here, to implement this rule. The league has obviously decided to move forward with it. They announced it, I believe Christmas Eve, we'll call it, that they were moving forward. And we responded immediately that we will be opposing this rule, which means, we now have a grievance and arbitration procedure that we will use to obtain clarity on whether the league has the authority to do this. We contend they don't. I'm sure they contend they do. I know they do. And we just have an honest disagreement there. So it's important to have a legal process, which is, I think, frankly, a really good thing, to obtain clarity over the league's authority to unilaterally do something like this. Our position is that anything involving, this is a player compensation rule that must be collectively bargained. We are prepared to bargain in good faith, and we have proposed that instead of implementing what we think is an ill-conceived, convoluted rule that does not achieve its intended purpose, that the league instead simply increase the salary cap by the same amount of money they're already willing to spend. We think it's a very fair and reasonable proposal.
Yeah, it feels like sort of a collision of business and marketing objectives that the league has that seem to be sort of couched within something that, as you say, is and was always intended to be collectively bargained because it does deal with player salaries. And one of the things that now that we are in transfer window season that I keep hearing, conversations I keep having with my colleagues is, given that the PA is opposing this, given that arbitration is imminent, what could possibly happen if a player is looking to join the league or if a deal is looking to be made on the basis of this high impact player rule? And then if, for example, in arbitration, it ends up becoming abolished. And I'm just curious, is this, in addition to everything else that players have expressed, a concern of theirs about how, like, what the likelihood is of this not even being a topic of discussion in a few months?
Well, look, all players and agents and teams can do is work with the rules as they know them to be today. Our position is that's what happened a month ago. It's what's happening again today. So, these will be validly negotiated contracts, and the league is entering into agreements and making representations that it is able to pay the players the amounts that are agreed to in a contract. And so we do not anticipate that, our position on the high impact player rule undermines contracts being honored in any way, shape, or form. This will be, frankly, a league problem. It's not an us problem. So our proposal has been to increase the cap by $1 million, which would be sufficient to support all the contracts that are now relying on the high impact player rule. Part of the reason for our proposal is that you're not having to go back and undo contracts or reconsider the things you did over the previous several months, because we know that the grievance and arbitration process will take some time. Unfortunately, we're going to have to find new dates to set up a hearing. We don't have dates currently scheduled. I'd like to see that get done soon. So yeah, it's gonna take some time. We recognize that, and it'll be up to the arbitrator to decide what is the appropriate. Assuming that we were to be successful at arbitration, it'll be the arbitrator's decision as to what's the appropriate remedy for that result. And our position is that this is an issue that needs to be collectively bargained, and we've already made a proposal. So we stand ready to get this resolved as quickly as possible. It's going to require some work.
And has there been any space for players to, you mentioned this earlier, that it's difficult to even make proposals about changes to a rule that the foundations of which you already disagree. But has there been any sort of channel, I guess, for players to communicate with the league and express what their grievances are or make any sorts of proposed changes to this rule?
Well, that's what the union's for, right? That's our job. So when in consultation with our board, we obtain feedback, and there's a real willingness to consider are there some virtues to this proposal? Is there something we could work with? It is interesting to consider. Well, actually, before I even get into that, let me say this. This is really important. All of us agree that players like Trinity Rodman should make more than other people. Like there's no dissent, there's no issue with the union or our leadership, players in our union, agreeing that this is a pro league with the world's best players, and there are going to be differences in player compensation. Some players, there will be players who make the most, there will be players on the minimum salary, and there's probably going to be a larger chunk in the middle. One of the things we're really proud of as a union is the work we've done to effectively create a middle class and strengthen the middle class within NWSL, which has grown over the years. We're really proud of that. And that is not necessarily in opposition or at odds with the idea that truly elite players like Trinity Rodman are going to make more than other people. There's no issue with that. That's not at all our position. We agree. And in fact, that's why we've proposed increasing the salary cap. And the general sentiment, interestingly enough, and I suspect there are some in NWSL or some teams who might disagree with what I'm about to say, but a lot of what I've heard from our players is the belief that if we increase the cap, those dollars are going to go to the top paid players anyway. It's not going to be spread throughout the roster. it just gives the GMs discretion to make the nuanced judgment calls that are typically involved in assessing market value. And it's not going to close doors that should otherwise be open to players, for example, from Africa and Japan and Brazil, players who have made this league what it is and are as impactful and important to us as any other player and should not be foreclosed from achieving fair compensation just because, the structures that be, the Guardian and the Ballon d'Or or Sports Pro Media or ESPN do not assign them a value that a GM or a team might. So that's one of the many flaws that we see in this proposal.
Yeah, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I've also been thinking about the weight and responsibility sort of redistribution that this rule could result in, specifically when it comes to general managers, but even scouts and recruiters. Have players sort of expressed concerns to that degree? Because the relationship, for example, between an owner and a team is very different from that of a general manager and a team, totally different objectives. And as I've also written, this rule could potentially and is likely to lessen the influence that some of these other front office positions have at a time, I think, when those positions we're just beginning to sort of gain a lot more responsibility, and we're seeing former players increasingly become general managers. So to sort of even pan out, have there been sort of conversations or concerns expressed by players about how this rule could sort of change the fabric of the NWSL at a time when it's still sort of coming into place?
This needs to be said. Leagues do not build rosters. Teams do. It's all the more reason this is not a roster classification. The league is not in the business of constructing rosters. To your point, that is the role and responsibility of GMs and teams and their staffs to make determinations about, there's a lot of conversations about the commercial aspect when it comes to this rule, because clearly that is the intended purpose. I think it is really important to also acknowledge that this is a soccer league and it needs to be about the soccer. The soccer is the product. It is what fans watch. It's what they go buy tickets to see. It's what they, tune into a broadcast to watch. And we can't lose sight of that. I'm all for growing the commercial value of this league. We support that. We don't think you have to choose one over the other. We think it's both and. And it's all the more reason that empowering GMs to make these determinations. And look, if there are concerns about the ways that teams are managing their rosters, there are lots of ways to address that through education, ongoing training and support, resource sharing, best practices sharing. And I hope the GMs are listening to this podcast. I hope they're talking to each other. I have the privilege in my role of having great relationships with executive directors at other unions and having relationships with other unions through the AFL-CIO. I don't profess to know all the secrets to this craft. I learn from other people, and I ask questions, and we share ideas, and I ask for advice. And I would fully expect that's something that needs to happen at all levels of this business, including on the GM and business side and the technical side. And so, we all want to grow this business together. I do think where you started is absolutely the right place to start, which is, oddly enough, even though we have different ideas about how to go about it, I do tend to think what we're hoping the outcome will be as a union and as a league and as teams are actually very much aligned, which is that we do want this to be the best league in the world. I don't think this is the way to achieve it. I hope for that, though. I want the best players in the world to come play in the NWSL and be part of our union. We want this to be a wildly successful business. I personally am really proud that the NWSL stands on its own 2 feet. We don't pull from the coffers of men's pro teams that have unlimited budgets, to grow this business. We are quite literally doing it only on our own. Women are building and growing this league, and we can't lose sight of the fact it's the players that drive that value. And, when we talk about assessing value, that is not something you can reduce to bullet points and third-party publications.
And Megan, what would you say at this point is the relationship between the Players Association and the league right now, given these tensions, given how long and drawn out this discussion and back and forth has been?
I would say tension in the labor management relationship is healthy. This is okay. All of this is okay. We're doing our job. We're advocating for the interests of the players. When our interests are aligned with what the league is trying to achieve, there's harmony. You won't hear about grievances and arbitration procedures. When the interests of the players is at odds with what the league is doing, it is our responsibility to protect those interests and to use the processes that are available to us to protect them. That's what we're doing. It's not personal. I don't see this at all. I'm an attorney and have some distance when I look at legal issues. We can all certainly, and I have no doubt there are times when the league is frustrated with me and vice versa. It does happen, but these are signs of strength as a union. I think there are signs of growth in the league. I think it's very positive that the board voted to increase their level of investment in player compensation. That's a good thing. Where we have disagreement is what they are permitted to do under the CBA without collective bargaining. We've proposed collective bargaining. We're prepared to do that. We stand ready. At any time that they accept our invitation to engage in collective bargaining to resolve this, we're ready to go.
Mic drop moment. I think if I've heard one yet in this conversation. Yeah, it in some ways, I mean, the sort of like broad glass half full interpretation possibly is the fact that this tension even exists is 100% a sign of growth. It probably could not have been avoided. The timing, ... maybe didn't have to go down exactly as it is now, but we're here. And we really appreciate your time, Meghann, especially as you are recovering and getting back to good health. As we've said, this is 100% an ongoing story. The timeline is still coming together. So listeners, don't fret. We will be with you every step of the way. And we really appreciate your time and insight, Meghann. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for reporting, and appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
All right. We've just wrapped my very insightful, always helpful conversation with Megan Burke, and we were doing a bit of a swap on stage. Megan Burke makes her exit, and to help me unpack that conversation, I'm inviting podcast producer and king of the flowy transition, Theo Lloyd-Hughes. Theo, Happy New Year. How's it going?
Happy New Year, Tamerra. So good to see you. I can't fill Megan Burke's shoes. No one can, but I will do my best to kind of work with you through the conversation you just had. So T, I'll kind of turn the question on you in the host chair. How was that? What did you learn from your sit down with Megan Burke, kind of getting the PA side of this debate over the high impact player role?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was struck by is I think from the outset, and especially as a journalist, my job is to tell stories. It's easy to look at this moment and sort of your brain sort of automatically assigns certain archetypes to the main characters. I don't mean like main characters in the meme way. I mean like the people that we tend to hear from, whether that's the league, whether that's Meghan, and the Players Association. And I think it's easy to sort of fit all of these pieces into something that feels classic, like the league versus the Players Association. And I'm not saying it's not that, but what struck me about my conversation with Meghan was how much the Players Association and the league are actually aligned in a lot of fundamental aspects of the future that they envision for this league. Everyone wants Trinity Rodman to stay. Everyone believes that the players need to be earning more. And everyone wants the NWSL to be the best and most competitive and viable and commercially successful league in the world. But as we noted in our conversation, the ways in which the league and the PA want to go about that are very different. And I know typically you'll say, there are many ways we're not using the very abusive to animals metaphor there, but there are many ways to achieve a goal, many ways to score
Indeed.
A goal. Let's keep it soccer related. And I feel like when you have that sort of adage, the implication is that the journey matters less than reaching the same destination. But this is not that. The journey actually matters a lot. I've actually always fundamentally believed that. And the journey is what is sort of being disputed right now. But I think it's helpful to remember that even hearing from the executive director of the Players Association that there are some things that the league and the Players Association both want is really helpful because this is a legal matter at the end of the day. And even though there is like a narrative feel to it, especially when individuals like Trinity Rodman are very much involved in this story, it's easy to sort of situate this in like an us versus them sort of dichotomy. And like I said, it's not that, but there's more to it than that. What stood out for you, Theo?
Well, I think you said it just there, right? It's a legal matter. and this is going to be decided by lawyers and arbitrators. And Meghann did a very good job of explaining something we brought up in the previous podcast episode, where you and me kind of got into our feelings about the high impact player rule. Is it's actually two separate issues at this point. And the original grievance regarding Trinity Rodman's contract that the NWSL turned down, that was actually before the implementation of the high impact player rule. We got to see some sort of resolution or some sort of next steps on that by Friday, because that's when the league's extension is due. So Meghann very clearly said we're waiting on a response on that. And the other kind of thing is the legal arbitration for the NWSLPA's opposition to the HIP rule has not even come yet. I thought that was an interesting thing we learned from talking to Meghann Burke. Yeah, the timeline, right? Like, they haven't even filed the new grievance, and they're expecting to do that sometime this week because they're still waiting for the old grievance to get through. So I think Meghann was very honest and very candid when she said this, we might not have a resolution tomorrow, next week. This could be much further down the line. A lot of things are going to have to line up for something that gets resolved. But she also said, nothing is necessarily going to stand in the way of players signing contracts. So I think that's a really important point to note, whether it's Rodman, whether it's, Tamerra, we could throw out a name like Bia Zanerato, right? An active free agent in the NWSL who is going to be negotiating contracts. She could go out and sign a high impact player contract, and the NWSLPA is going to obviously not stand in the way. Down the line, should their proposal of an increased salary cap come through, that money in that contract may just get changed from being a high impact to just being standard salary cap money. So I think that was an interesting thing Meghann kind of got into, which is this idea that, like, the world is moving on. Things are going to take time. They can't change that. But we have to sort of know that this is going to go on, and legal lawyers and legal minds are going to have to be the ones battling it out down the stretch.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really important point to tease out, because I know a lot of the conversations that I've been having were of concern about what might happen if a player signs a high impact player salary, only to, for example, and I mentioned this to Meghann as well, to have this rule be abolished at the other side of this arbitration, which again goes back to what I was saying at the top of the show. There are a lot of moving parts to this, and things are overlapping and moving at different paces. Some are accelerating and then they get slowed down, which I think is why these kinds of episodes are so important. And I just think that as we move forward, we're also setting precedents with these moments. This is another thing that I think you and I spoke about last week. How is this also sort of altering the foundation upon which this league is built as it continues to grow? I think those kinds of things are really important to be considering, along with the way that this rule came about and what the players' concerns might be. I believe that this league is only going to get more international. I think it's only going to I hope it only gets more attractive to players from outside of the U.S. and even within the U.S. who may have been considering going abroad over the NWSL. But it really does feel like an important flashpoint between now and wherever we find ourselves, a month from now. I also think that it's really important to point out from, purely a journalistic integrity standpoint. We had this whole conversation, this really enriching conversation with the executive director of the NWSL Players Association. I think it's important to point out that we have also reached out to the league. We are eager to hear from the league in a similar sort of fashion, because not only is it important to, and I know this is not always the case, important to hear both sides, but to Megan's point, they are aligned in a lot of things. And I think that when we talk about sections in the collective bargaining agreement, like we did with 816, I am very curious myself to hear how the league is interpreting those rules, the same way that we heard Meghann Burke sort of capture the interpretation from the union perspective. So know that we have reached out to the league and are very interested in hearing from them on this matter as well. And yeah, I'm going to speak it into existence that we're able to secure that interview too, because that's just as important here.
Well said, T. Yeah, I'm excited for when someone from the league wants to come on full time. and give their side of the story. It was great to have Meghann Burke on today with UT. And yeah, this is definitely, not the last time we'll talk about this, I'm sure. It's not the first time, listener. So much great stuff over at The Athletic and in your podcast feed. But we've got to do it justice, because we know this is going to affect not just this generation of players, but maybe the next generation and, the NWSL's past, present and future. So it is a big story. We are going to go into it, but don't worry, because there's lots of exciting chat that maybe focuses on the soccer even more on the horizon as well.
Yes, because as Megan also said, this is about the soccer at the end of the day.
I kept hearing that ringing in my ears. I was like, I do want to make sure we talk about the soccer as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm personally pretty AFCON pilled right now. But it's also because the girls are on a break right now. So I need to fill the void somehow. And I'm always going to choose AFCON if it's available to fill that void. But, we're only a couple of months out from WAFCON. So know that my allegiances have not changed, but I love me some AFCON. But yes, at the end of the day, this is about the game. I think these episodes, like I've said before, are so important. I pride ourselves. I feel proud of the range that we have on Fulltime, to have episodes like this, to be talking to players, to make up silly awards that maybe one day will become real because our ideas are brilliant. But we appreciate all of the engagement and every ear that lends itself to this show every week. So we appreciate you. Happy New Year again. And thanks for hanging out with us. Onwards into 2026. If you have any questions or concerns or thoughts about this high impact player rule, anything that you think we have not explained well enough, any remaining questions that you have, you know how to reach out to us at TA Fulltime on Instagram and TikTok. We're always checking our DMs, fulltime@theathletic.com. If you have so much to say that you just need to bust out the laptop and write a proper email, we love those. And this episode is also on YouTube, if you like to watch it that way. We always appreciate those views as well. Also, if you didn't know, Yahoo Sports and The Athletic have partnered to deliver the very best coverage of women's sports. We're in a new season. Women's college basketball is back and in full swing, unrivaled. Hello. Gonna be competing with AFCON for my eyeballs very soon. You can check that out at the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports.
I was just going to ask, do you have an unrivaled team? You backing anyone?
I am about to be locked in, and I need to review the rosters. Right
no
now,
logos, no kind of mascots taking your fancy?
No, because I love them all.
You love them all equally.
I just think, I got to go back and look, because I know there have been a couple of injuries and replacements and stuff like that. So by the time I'm back from my vacation, which is coming up soon, I will definitely have claimed my allegiance. But for right now, I'm very much like, everyone just have fun, because that is the spirit of Unrivaled. But good question. And thank you for holding me accountable to claiming a team. And that's our show. Thanks for listening. I am Tamerra Griffin. I am going to be doing laundry, packing, getting my nails done. I'm going on vacation soon, guys, and I can't wait. I actually love going on vacation this time of year. But you can catch me doing that on Instagram. And at some point, I'll get back to Blue Sky. But thank you for everyone who's following me there. It's like you're keeping the space warm for me. Fulltime is not possible without Theo Lloyd Hughes, esteemed podcast producer and king of the transition, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. We appreciate you so much. Happy New Year one more time, and we'll see you soon.